Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a fascinating, kind of mind-bending linguistic and historical mystery from the ancient biblical texts. It all revolves around the true identity of the rock. We see that phrase, the rock, scattered all over the scriptures, right? But what if there's a deeper, actual, tangible metaphor running through these ancient writings? What if it's not just a poetic figure of speech, but a continuous, literal story hiding right there in plain sight? Okay, let's just picture a really famous scene for a second. Think of Moses and the children of Israel, stuck out there in the scorching wilderness. The people are incredibly thirsty, they're crying out, and God gives Moses a specific instruction. He tells him to strike a rock, and water will gush out. But pause and think about the practical reality of that moment. The wilderness is literally made of rocks. Didn't Moses stop to wonder which specific rock God was talking about? I mean, if you were surrounded by thousands of giant boulders, wouldn't you be asking, Lord, which one?
Well, it turns out there's this fascinating Hebrew grammar clue that answers that exact question. In the original text, God doesn't just say strike a rock. The Hebrew word actually has the letter hey placed right in front of it. And in Hebrew, hey acts as the definite article. It translates directly to the. So Moses wasn't just walking up to some random stone in the desert. He was told to strike the rock. This implies it was a highly specific, totally recognizable rock that was already right there with them on their journey.
And we can actually trace this brilliant concept through a single continuous thread. We're going to start all the way back with the patriarch Jacob in Genesis, move forward to Moses in the book of Numbers, shift over to the poetic declarations of the prophets, and finally arrive at the Apostle Paul's letters in the New Testament. This isn't just a random assortment of rock metaphors scattered around. It's a meticulously crafted historical and theological timeline. So the trail begins right here with Jacob. In Genesis chapter 28, Jacob is on a journey, he stops for the night, and he actually uses a stone as a pillow. As he's sleeping on the stone, he has this profound vision of a ladder reaching up to heaven, with angels ascending and descending. When he wakes up, just completely awestruck, he takes that very rock he slept on, sets it upright as a pillar, and anoints it with oil. He calls that place Bethel, declaring that this specific stone represents the house of Elohim, or the house of God. And he makes a vow that if God keeps him safe, this God will be his God. Now, you might be wondering, why go through all that trouble hauling around and setting up a heavy rock? Well, you have to remember, in the ancient Near East, they didn't have cameras or smartphones to just snap a pic of major life events. Physical stones served as absolutely crucial, permanent visual reminders of God's miraculous presence and his promises. Jacob and Laban piled up stones to mark a covenant. Joshua later set up stones so future generations would remember crossing the Jordan River. These memorial markers were basically treasured, tangible proof of their history with a mighty God. Fast forward to the end of Jacob's life in Genesis 49. He's blessing his son Joseph, and look at the magnificent title that emerges here. He says Joseph's strength comes by the strength of Jacob's mighty one, in the name of the shepherd, Israel's rock. Do you see what just happened? His physical memorial stone from Bethel has evolved into a powerful, divine title. The literal rock of Jacob has now officially become the spiritual rock of Israel. And that brings us to a really compelling historical crossroads. If Jacob established this stone as a massive memorial representing the house of God, how do ancient traditions explain the physical presence of a specific rock hundreds of years later, out in the middle of the desert with Moses? Like, if God told Moses to strike the rock, how exactly did it get there? There are actually two rich traditions that answer this exact question. One prominent Jewish literary tradition states that a rock, which they call the Well of Miriam, miraculously followed Israel throughout their 40 years in the wilderness, providing water until Miriam died. But then there's also a fascinating Christian legend suggesting that the rock that followed them was actually the very same memorial pillar Jacob set up. The idea is that the Israelites cherished it so much, they carried it down into Egypt and then literally hauled it all the way out during the Exodus, like this giant, treasured family heirloom. But here's the crucial point. Whether you lean towards the tradition of Miriam's miraculous traveling well or the legend of Jacob's anointed ancestral pillar being carried by the Israelites, the outcome is exactly the same. When God commanded Moses to strike the rock, Moses wasn't confused. He was interacting with a known monumental artifact sitting right there in their camp, not just randomly swinging his staff at desert rubble. But the physical act of Moses striking this rock, that has massive spiritual implications. This physical striking beautifully parallels the rabbinic concept of Messiah ben Yosef. In ancient writings, Messiah ben Yosef is known as the suffering redeemer. Just as the physical rock in the desert had to be struck so that life-giving waters could flow out and save the people from dying of thirst, the suffering Messiah is struck so that spiritual, living waters can flow out to redeem humanity. And get this, our source highlights a stunning linguistic connection in Deuteronomy chapter 32. We're told that Israel grew comfortable, rebelled, and spurned the rock that was his salvation. If you look at the original Hebrew text, the word translated as salvation right there is literally Yeshua. The verse is explicitly telling us they spurned the rock that was their Yeshua. The very name of the Messiah is woven directly into the metaphor of the rock. How incredible is that? The Apostle Paul actually pieces the whole mystery together for us flawlessly. In his first letter to the Corinthians, he explicitly writes about the Israelites in the wilderness, saying, "For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ." Paul takes the physical legend of the traveling wilderness rock, the one that provided water to the Israelites, and directly links it to the spiritual manifestation of the Messiah, Yeshua. And the prophets just continue this incredible metaphor throughout the scriptures. Take a look at this quote from Isaiah 28. God declares that he's laying a foundation stone in Zion, a tested, precious cornerstone. This isn't just any building material we're talking about. The prophet is elevating this foundational stone to the ultimate source of stability and truth for the people of Zion. It represents a foundation that is so solid it will never crack or crumble. Yet, we have to remember the narrative of this rock is also one of conflict and rejection. Just as Moses ultimately disobeyed God by striking the rock a second time when he was only supposed to speak to it, the Psalms prophesied that this ultimate cornerstone would initially be rejected by the religious builders of the day. As Psalm 118 proclaims, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The very foundation of salvation was initially completely overlooked. Bringing all these ancient clues together, man, a breathtaking picture really starts to emerge. The metaphor of the rock is just vast. Yeshua is identified as the living water that quenches our deepest thirst. He's the rock of offense, a stumbling block for those who reject him. Yet for those who believe, he is the rock of salvation, the ultimate shepherd of Israel, and the mighty God of Jacob that the patriarchs worshipped all those years ago. This entire journey, starting from a simple stone used as a desert pillow, traveling as a life-saving well in the scorching wilderness, and culminating as the ultimate cornerstone of faith, is absolutely remarkable. It really leaves us wondering, what other profound truths and shadows of the Messiah are just waiting to be uncovered, hiding right there in plain sight within the ancient scriptures? Well, there is so much more depth to these scriptures than we can possibly cover here. To explore these concepts deeper, please refer to the original article located on the website. A link to the article is provided under the explainer description below. I highly encourage you to go read it and look up all the verses for yourself. It's totally worth it. Finally, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this explainer to help us spread the truth of God's word to the world. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.